In this episode of Ask Paul Kirtley, we are going to talk about using Birch Polypore as a strop, the importance of reading the weather, what trees and plants should you learn, what my favourite wild edibles are, and what you need to do if you have to make running repairs on your axe while out in the field. Welcome to episode 61 of Ask Paul Kirtley, and we are into the 60s properly, which is great. It's cold today, it's frosty, I'm out, I've got my coffee, got my warm coffee while I'm sitting here. I do have a duvet jacket in my bag if I need to put that on, but I'm feeling quite cozy at the moment. Got a nice merino wool base layer on, I've got a buffalo Special 6 shirt on over the top of that, and then I've got my Nerona Recon, the old style one, on top of that, and I've got this lovely new thicker loop stitch woven merino hat that I bought in Canada when I was there in September. It was way too warm then. When I was there it was high 20s, 30 degrees Celsius. I did that trip on the French River. If you haven't seen the video on my blog and the blog post around it, check that out, because it was a lovely trip, and I'm sure if you're interested in that style of journeying, you will learn something from that, even little tidbits. And I've got those new campfire notes section in that journey blog as well. So I'm going to try and do that when I do blogs of journeys. I'm going to try and draw out what I did around the campfire, even if it's just how did I light the fire that day. It might be the same every day, it might be different, but it gives you an insight into how I'm applying my bushcraft skills on a day-to-day basis, even in the most benign ways, things that I might not consider to explain to people or even to relate to people. I've had a few questions on that, or quite a few questions over the last year or two, and I came up with this idea of adding those in. So check that out, the 18-mile island loop on my blog. See what you think there. But anyway, it's a lot cooler now than it was back a few months ago when I did that trip, and I haven't done an Ask Paul Kirtley for a little while. I've been very busy with various projects, and while I have been out and about, I just haven't had the chance to sit down and record any of these. To be honest, I hadn't had the chance even to sit down and look through all the questions in the question bank until yesterday, and I have sorted some out for this episode and queued some up for episode 62 and 63 going forwards as well. So I've got a bit more organised, got a little bit more time now towards the end of the year, and I can get through those questions for you. Okay, well, let's jump in. First one, there are two very similar questions. This is one of the benefits of waiting a little while to look at the questions. You start to see that there are some that are similar, and I can answer both of them for you at the same time. So the first one is from Under Broadleaf Adventures, and nice photo of a Birch Polypore there, Piptoporus betulinus is the Latin name for that fungus. It's a bracket fungus which grows on birch. And the question is, hi Paul, I know there are a number of uses of Birch Polypore, Piptoporus betulinus, but at this time I'm particularly interested to know how you would go about processing it into a strop. For example, does it need drying out first? What part of the fungus becomes the strop? Would you glue it to a piece of wood, etc.? Many thanks, and thank you for all the free information you're putting out. P.S. I'm loving the Paul Kirtley podcast. All the best, Nick Piers. Well, thanks, Nick. I'm glad you appreciate both Ask Paul Kirtley and the Paul Kirtley podcast. The other very similar question that I got, Nick, was from Andy. Similar question. Hi Paul, and this is by email. Hi Paul, hope you're well. I have a query about Birch Polypore. I've read that you can dry it out, then trim it down and glue it to a wooden board and use it as a strop. I was wondering if you have done this. and how efficient it is as a strop compared to a leather strop. Thank you for taking the time to make these videos. They have proved useful many times. Well, I'm glad you also enjoy and find these useful, Andy. Very, very similar questions from both of you there, Nick and Andy, using Birch Polypore as a strop. So what you need is one, like the one that was in the photo, that's relatively decent size, that's quite broad, and that you're going to be able to take a flat section from crossways. So you've got that slightly browny grey outer dermis which you can peel away and makes very useful elastoplast coverings for cuts, that type of thing you can use them for. There's lots of other uses for Birch Polypore, as you mentioned. We won't get into that now. But inside it's pure white. It's white as the driven snow, as they say, for a fresh one. When they get old, they get sort of manky and corky and dried up on the inside, and that's not the condition you want. You want it where it's pure white on the inside, and what you want is a nice flat slice of that. So you will want to take a sharp knife perhaps and try and probably better to do it in a workshop than in the field, or at least on a kitchen bench or kitchen table where you've got a solid surface to work on, and you want to take as flat a slice as you possibly can. You can leave it a bit thick to start off with, but you want it as flat as possible on one side and of a minimum thickness of, say, at least 5 mil, I would say. Don't go any thinner than that because it becomes a little bit fragile. I would say about 5 mil minimum thickness, which would be about 1/4 of an inch, say. Let me just make sure I got that right. In inches, about 2 centimeters for an inch, 1 centimeter for half an inch, 5 mil. Yeah, so about 1/4 of an inch thickness for those of you that are working in Imperial. And then, yes, stick it onto a board so you've got one solid side, and then hopefully you've cut the other side relatively flat. What you don't want is something really wavy, because you need to get that side as flat as possible, and again you need a really sharp tool to do that. Slightly ironic given that you're you're using it to strop something to get it sharp, but you're basically making something that looks like a paddle strop, so you might want to do that as a little carving project first, to carve a little paddle, like a elongated, quite thin chopping board, if you like, with a little bit of a handle, and then you can you can glue this strip. And again, so the bigger the polypore that you can take a flat section out of crossways, the longer strip you're going to get, and then you can glue that onto the board. And then if there are any undulations on the top, then you need to carefully remove those to get it as flat as possible. It is quite soft, at least it's malleable, and it will squeeze, and it will comply to the shape of the knife. So, you know, a few up and downy bits, not the end of the world, but get it as flat as you can, and then you can strop on that, just as you would on a paddle strop that has leather on it. And it works very well. You can see why it gets its alternative name of razor strop fungus, because they did used to make that type of strop for cutthroat razors at the old-fashioned barbers, and they'd use them to strop amongst other things. Of course, they'd use leather as well, but it is something that was traditionally used, and it does work well. It just takes a little bit of preparation, and do be careful of your fingers when you're cutting it. It is quite tough, even though it's not a super tough material. You can break it. Cutting it straight is a bit fiddly, and you'll end up needing to put a reasonable amount of pressure on, so do think about where your hands are when you're cutting through it. It's another reason I think you should do it at home on a bench where you can do it in controlled circumstances. But have a go. You might mess it up the first one, but find another one and have another go. There are quite a frequently spotted fungus. Birch trees are common. Birch trees in a state of decay are quite common. They're a short-lived tree. Birch polypore is a common fungus, so you're likely to find it. It's not a massive rarity, so if you fluff one up, you'll find some more and have another go, and you'll get better at it until you get a good strop, and then they last for quite a long time. So hopefully that helps both of you. Next question. So this is another question from Instagram. Nice photo of a book called The Cloud Spotter's Guide that SJ Outdoor Guy has posted. And with a discussion of this book, he has asked the Ask Paul Kirtley question. So he's put hashtag Ask Paul Kirtley, and that's how I found it, by searching on that hashtag. By the way, if you're going to use hashtag Ask Paul Kirtley, spell my name correctly. Yeah, there's a few people who've contacted me saying, I asked a question. And yeah, I found them eventually, but you've not spelt my name right. So that's when I can't find them. There's an E-Y, L-E-Y. Common misspelling is just doing L-Y. Yeah, L-E-Y at the end. Otherwise I won't find it. Anyway, I found this one because he spelt it right. And he asks, Hi Paul, after reading a couple of Tristan Gooley's books, after hearing them on your podcast, I've decided to learn more about how to read the weather and understand signs of impending changes. How important do you think this is as an outdoor skill? Should this be a more widespread ability, or is it something to move on to after acquiring other more basic skills? I think it's important. Depends on partly you. At the end of the day, you learn all of these things largely because you want to. You follow your interests, whether that's weather, natural navigation, tree and plant identification, craft work, canoeing, skiing, what all these things that we do in the outdoors, we largely do by choice. And so yes, a lot of it is down to your personal interests and what you want to prioritize in terms of learning, and what you find intellectually stimulating, what you find interesting, what you find rewarding. But clearly there are some activities in the outdoors where the ability to understand the weather is important, and there's some terrains where it's more important than others. I would say if you're in the mountains and you're in the hills, you need to have a good understanding of the local weather conditions for where you're operating, where you're hiking, where you're climbing, so that you can see what's going on with the weather. Of course, you can use modern technology, you can use weather forecasts and all of those things, but still having an understanding of what different types of clouds do, what types of weather come under certain circumstances, and of course the weather can be highly changeable in the mountains, and not always are the local factors and the local effects and the local conditions reflected in the more macro forecasts. And so having an understanding of what's going on, particularly in the mountains, I think is very important, and rightly so. Other times when it's important, if you're out in a canoe, particularly if you're out in open water, you need to have an understanding of the wind in particular, and what might be changing in the distance. You might be looking for thunderstorms. You don't want to be out in the middle of a big lake in a thunderstorm because you're the highest thing on it. So there are circumstances there where being able to read the weather is important. And of course, if you're on a wilderness expedition, you might not have all your electronic gadgets connected to the internet in the way that we do on a day-to-day basis, or closer to home. I think that will come eventually. I think eventually we'll have more access to satellite connectivity when we're in wilderness places, and certainly in terms of data, and we'll probably end up having more data with us as certainly as an option in the next decade or two than we've ever had before. So that's something. But now I think if you're on a trip out in the wilds where maybe you have got a satellite phone with you, but that's just for emergencies or touching base occasionally, you're not going to be necessarily calling in every day for the weather. And even if you did get a macro forecast for the area you are, again, micro conditions can vary, local conditions can vary. So having an understanding of the weather conditions in your area, looking to see what's going on, can be important. And again, if you're out in really cold places in the winter, having an understanding of what's going on with the weather, and in particular having an understanding of what indicates it getting colder. I've probably mentioned this before, and I do keep meaning to write a blog on it because I do have some photos. But one thing that you notice, if you're, say, living in a heated tent and the stove's just ticking away and there's a bit of smoke coming out the chimney, one of the things you will have noticed, I'm sure, if you're a regular winter camper, is when it starts getting colder and you get cold air pushing down, you'll see the smoke going across and up, and then it will almost look like it's hit a glass ceiling. and it'll be going then across vertically, almost have a straight line delineation at the top of it where you can see that layer of cold air coming down, and that's often an indicator that it's going to get a lot colder, and you often see that towards the end of the day as it starts to get colder. But equally, if you see it at any other time, it's going to be an indication that things are getting colder. And so again, it's what's important in that environment. If you're in a really cold environment to start off with and it's getting colder, you want to know that. If you're out on a big lake and the wind's getting up or there's a storm coming in, you want to know that. If you're in the hills and you've had good conditions but the wind's getting up, rain's coming in, visibility is going to go down, thunderstorms again, you want to be able to know that. So I think being able to read the weather conditions is a valuable skill in many different aspects of being in the outdoors. And then over and above that, of course, you've just got the pleasure, if you like, of knowing, of being familiar with what's going on. You're not wandering around nature like some little robin flying around. You're not wandering around nature like some sort of confused child that doesn't know anything about it. You can understand all nature's signs, including the weather. Then you feel much more comfortable and much more connected with it. And so it's very valuable, I think, from that perspective as well. The more you can know about the natural world around you and how you fit in with it and how you interact with it, the better. Good question. I like that. And Cloud Spotter's Guide is a nice book to read. Trees and plants to learn. Another Instagram question. You can see I hit the Instagram hashtag search hard in putting these questions together. This is from HF Survival School and posted a nice picture of a water-filled gorge in his part of the world. And this question is, I have watched your recent video about how to get better in bushcraft quickly. Very interesting video. I think that was my Bushcraft Show 2017 presentation you're talking about. I can link to that here and also link to it in the show notes at paulkirtley.co.uk. And I've noticed a few people coming to my blog and searching for show notes. Yeah, it's not something that is separate to the podcast. If you just come to my blog and find the episode, what I mean by the show notes are all the notes that are there with the podcast on my blog. So the player, there's a podcast player there where you can listen straight off my podcast. You can download the MP3 straight off my blog, or you can click through to iTunes, Stitcher, etc. and find it there. But all the links and information and also some links to related material on my site, and they could be articles, they could be videos that link into what we talk about on this episode, for example, or they could be on a Paul Kirtley podcast. It could be links to other interviews or discussions with that same guest. They could be links to their social media platforms so you can say hi to them. All of those things are always under that episode on my blog. It's not a separate thing somewhere else. So if you just go and search on, again, top menu, you'll find podcasts and you'll find Ask Paul Kirtley. All the episodes are listed there, or you can just go and search on that individual episode and you'll find all the notes there. Just for all of you that might need to know that. So when I talk about show notes, that's what I'm talking about. So I will link to that presentation that he's referring to here in the show notes. He said, very interesting video. Being the first so-called bushcrafter in this country, it's quite difficult to learn much without visiting particular places and talking to local elders. I saw the demographics on maps in your video where you showed what plant grows where. Can you please help me out and put me on a path? Tell me what plants and trees I should learn first and what uses do they have? Knowing what is available in my area, what are the main species I need to know and practice on? Also, what skills are the most important to work on? I'm interested in general bushcraft and well camping. My lifelong dream is to be on a level where I'll be able to live in the woods for at least a month. And yeah, so that's the question is covered there. So that's a big question, and it's not one that I'm going to have a complete answer to in this session. There's a lot of learning you want there. It sounds to me like you're being a little bit impatient. you're calling yourself a survival school, and I'm being blunt here, if you don't know your basic tree and plant identification and what the uses are where you are, you need to learn that first before teaching other people. But that's a good goal to have. A lot of people are interested in knives and fire and don't really go beyond that. For me, as I've said before, but I'll keep banging this drum because eventually it will go in, bushcraft is a practical study of nature and natural resources that we can use. Yeah. And then you can overlay ethics onto that, how you use them responsibly, in a way that conserves the resources, all of those things. But fundamentally, it is not a glass window between us and nature. We are studying it, and we are studying how to use it in a practical fashion. How do we make fire? How do we find food? How do we make cordage? How do we find our way using natural signs? All of those things require an interaction with the environment. And I think one of the core things is tree and plant identification. So you know best what's in your area. And you know best what's in your area because you can go out and see it. I can come here, I'm in the northeast of England, near to where I spent all of my teenage years growing up, and I'm very familiar with the trees and the plants that appear here, and that then leads you on via curiosity to ask the question, what's this tree? What's this tree here with the spines on it and the red berries? What's this tree with the flaky bark and the fat green buds? What's this tree here with the funny alien looking buds on it and the straight secondary growth on it? What's this tree over here with the evergreen shiny green leaves on it? You start looking at what's there. What are the common species where you are? Work out what they are. A lot of them will have uses. And then you can cross-reference and find out what the uses are. And then you can apply the skills. So like, I know this here is a sycamore. Yeah. And I know that the dead wood, if there are any dead branches on it, are good for friction firelighting. It's also really nice, the green wood, you can carve spoons with it. They end up being pretty tough, but lightweight. It's a nice carving wood. Doesn't split off the grain like birch does. We've got hawthorn here with edible berries, spines that can be used for fish hooks, pretty good small sticks for kindling, although it's quite spiky. You've got bracken here, which is a good tinder material. So I've got my friction firelighting wood here with my sycamore. I've got some small sticks, dry sticks there that I can start to use, and I can see there's some more over there. There's some honeysuckle over there as well, which has a bark which will come off, and I can buff up into a nice tinder bundle, and I can probably use that in conjunction with some bracken, dry bracken around the outside. So I've got everything here literally within spitting distance of where I'm sat that I can light a fire with. There's loads of things I can make a bow with here. I've got cordage, I've got a bootlace, I've got cordage in my pack there. I've got a knife and a saw, and so I can go get the materials. I could make a fire by friction with bow drill here, just with the materials that I've got within 10 meters of where I'm sitting. But that's because I know what these species are. I've looked at them, I've worked out what they are, and then I've also looked at bushcraft from the other perspective of what do I need to be able to do. What are the important skills to have? I need to be able to light fire. I need to have protection from the environment. Part of that's fire, part of it's shelter building, part of it's an understanding of my clothing. I need to be able to find water. I need to make it safe. I need to be able to find food eventually. And then you've got all the craft things as well, in terms of making cordage, in terms of making implements, in terms of making campcraft gadgets for suspending pots. All of those things are basics. Yeah, basic stuff. Then you've got natural navigation. You've got many different aspects. We talked about weather. There's lots of different aspects you can go down, but in terms of the tree and plant identification, what's in your area and what do you want to be able to do, and then cross-reference those. There isn't really any single resource that does that for you. As I say, the cue for you should be what's in my area, and then also, you know, those common things that we all need to be able to do. And there will be something where you are in Central to Eastern Europe. that terrain, there's loads and loads and loads. There's a big crossover with where we are in Britain. There's a big crossover with some of the things that are further east of you. There's lots and lots of resources there. If you want some formal instruction in tree and plant identification, I do have an online tree and plant identification masterclass which opens at the beginning of every year. You can go paulkirtley.co.uk/tree plant ID, and you will find a page where you can pop your email address in and I'll send you more information about that. Even if you are on my normal email list for my blog, I won't send you all the information. It's a little bit like that mail that you get in your mailbox for something that you don't want. Yeah? If it's something you want, ask for it, go to the page, leave me your email. It's a separate email distribution. I will send you the information about that online course. If you're on my blog mail, I might occasionally send out an email to say it's opening again soon. If you're interested, go and put your email, but I'm not going to send detailed information to the thousands and thousands of people that are on my blog distribution, because they might not be interested in tree and plant ID. They might be interested in clouds. They might be interested in hunting. They might be interested in canoeing. They might be interested in winter camping. And so I try and send information that's relevant. So if you're interested in the tree and plant ID, you specifically need to go and ask for that. And you can do that by going to paulkirtley.co.uk/tree plant ID. Okay, and that will redirect you to where you can put your email in. All right, so that's for you, and it's also for anybody else. In terms of basic bushcraft skills, there's lots and lots of stuff on my blog. For a syllabus, just go to my company, frontierbushcraft.com. Find the elementary wilderness bushcraft course, look at the syllabus of that course, use that as a guideline for what to learn first in terms of skills, and then also look at what trees and plants you've got in your locality and put the two together. Favourite wild edibles. This is from Wellesby Roots. Dave Wellesby is back. Wellesby's back in the house. His question is, hey brother, was wondering what your favourite wild edibles are, why and how you prepare them. Thanks for everything you do. Favourite wild edibles, well, that's an interesting one. Well, okay, depends how we're defining favourite, but cattails. Some people don't like the taste of cattails. I quite like the taste of cattail rhizomes, the ropey roots that you get growing in the silt and underwater. Roast them on the fire. They've got a pretty good flavour compared to a lot of wild foods. The energy you get from them, they make you feel good, and they don't taste that bad. Taste somewhere between a roasted chestnut and a potato, and they're pretty good. And so I quite like those. Simple to collect. Although you generally need to get wet, and at this time of year you're going to get cold. So think about you having your fire first if you're actually out properly foraging for them like that, and living out in the woods. But it's good energy, good carbohydrate, a lot of return for your investment. So that's kind of a favourite from that perspective. I also really like burdock, Arctium lapa, in the thistle family, in the Asteraceae. That has an edible taproot that looks a little bit like a parsnip. That's a good solid underground storage organ. That's a good solid root vegetable. It's tasty. It's not great boiled, but what's really good is if you cut it into little batons, so cut it into sections that are maybe a couple of inches long, and then cut it crossways like you make batons out of carrots or parsnips, and then shallow fry them. Really, really good. And again, yes, you need a little bit of oil, but otherwise it's just something that's come straight out of the ground, straight out of the wild, and it's really super tasty, and it's a good solid accompaniment to other foods. It's not a wild food. You know, there's a lot of wild food instruction and foraging instruction which goes on, which is all about greens and tastes and flavors, and that's fine. I've got nothing against flavors. I'm a big fan of varied flavors, but there's no calories there in a lot of wild food foraging instruction. It all looks nice, it tastes nice, but if we're really interested in living from the land, bushcraft and survival in the proper sense of the word, not just making a tasty salad, we need to know where we can get the calories. So those two are really good for getting some carbohydrate calories in. And I don't subscribe to this thing that carbs are bad either. If you are out working, traveling, moving, chopping wood, building shelters, checking traps, whatever you're doing, you need the energy, you need the carbohydrate energy. Your brain needs the carbohydrate energy to think straight and make good decisions. You need to be able to get that type of food from the wilds, and they both taste pretty good. So they're favourites, top of my list, both in terms of utility, if you like, but also I think the flavour's pretty good. I've mentioned chestnuts already. I think it's hard to beat if you take a sweet chestnut, whether it's a European sweet chestnut or an American sweet chestnut, and roast that on the fire, in the fire, however you do it, on a griddle. It's hard to beat the taste of a roast chestnut. And again, it's not processed. You're not doing anything to it other than heating it. Great flavour, good energy, good nutrition. That's a favourite. Wild mints. I like wild mints for flavouring, and I like them for a tea, for a nice mint tea. What else do I particularly like? Berries, of course. There's some great berries out there. Everything from the ubiquitous blackberry through to blaeberries or blueberries. I'm a big fan of those ericaceae berries. I like the lingon berries or the cowberries as they're known in to make a cordial. They're good. I like an elderberry cordial. Homemade elderberry cordial is good. I like a lot of the berry fruit flavours, and again, good nutrition, antioxidants, sugars, lots of micronutrients there as well. So yeah, I like those a lot. And then things like fat hen, one of the leaves, good flavour there. The goosefoots in general, nice flavours in there. Some of the brassicaceae, the mustards, the wild mustards and cresses, got some good flavours there. I like those a lot as well, like wood bitter cress, lady smock, cardamine pratensis, nice hot mustardy flavour in the leaves. And I'm just kind of off the top of my head here, but they're ones that spring to mind that I really look forward to finding. I really like the flavours from. And yeah, that's probably a good enough list for now. I'll probably think of more after I finish recording, but they're all firm favourites, definitely. Last question, running repairs on axe. And I apologise to you, John, for taking so long to answer this. I've for some reason missed the question at the time. I think I possibly just saw the photograph. There were a lot of photographs from the Bushcraft show posted at the time of me, of Dave Canterbury, of other people, of things that people had been to at our display on the Frontier Bushcraft stall, my live Ask Paul Kirtley that I did on the stage, and I just didn't register that there was a question attached to this. Apologies, John. But the question here is, thank you, Paul Kirtley, for the great axe safety display today at the Bushcraft Show 2017. So this is from late May. This is from 6 months ago. Apologies, John. I have an Ask Paul Kirtley I'd like to ask on the back of it, if I may. What would you recommend as a way of performing running repairs if your axe head becomes loose while out in the wilderness? Thanks for all your great content. You're a fantastic help to all who listen, and I, for one, appreciate greatly. Well, thank you, John. Hopefully you're not... you haven't been turned off by my apparent ignoring of your question. Hopefully you're still listening and appreciating what I'm putting out. Right, axe heads. I talked about axes a little while ago. It wasn't the same question, but it was a similar question. And the question was along the lines of, what would you do if you needed to replace the handle of your axe out in the field? And my answer to that was along the lines of, you shouldn't need to generally with a modern axe that's got a hickory handle, because I've never seen one break. And so, okay, and I'm not the be all and end all. I'm not omnipresent. I don't see everything that goes on, but I've taught a lot of people to use axes. I've seen a lot of people using axes. I've used axes a lot on summer trips, and in particular winter camping trips, and they've had hard use. I've used them for felling trees, for limbing, sectioning trees, for splitting, and I've never seen something like a Gransfors Brook handle break. I've had them that have been a bit subpar when they've arrived, like it looks like there's a bit of a crack in them, and I've either replaced the whole axe, sent it back and got another one, or I've replaced the handle. But I've not had a good handle that's been inspected. You know, you should check your axe. You know, when you come back from a trip, check it's good, check there isn't a split, check the head's not loose. And clearly, you know, that should be something that you check as you go along as well. The head's not loose. But if there's anything wrong with it, then do the repairs, do the maintenance at home, in your workshop, in your shed, in your living room, wherever you do these things, and make sure it's in good condition as it can be before you go out again. And again, you know, you don't just buy an axe and do nothing to it. You're going to maintain it, you're going to sharpen it, you're going to oil the head, you're going to maybe refinish the handle, you're at least going to occasionally put some linseed oil or similar onto the handle just to help protect the wood. And so while you're doing those things, you can be inspecting it quite closely and checking to see that it's okay. And when you come back from a trip, before, you know, you might want to clean it up, sharpen it, oil it, give it a clean, put some more oil on it, on the handle. Look for any signs of cracks, any signs of looseness, any signs of movement in the head, any signs of that type of thing. And I think you're going to catch any issues then. So with hickory handles, you're highly unlikely, if it's in good condition before you go out for a 2-week canoe trip or a 2-week winter camping trip, you're highly unlikely to break it. So that's just a recap of my thinking with a handle. And so equally, when you're looking at the axe, if there's any looseness or sign of movement in the head, deal with that at home before you head out. Now, if you're in the field, of course, the head might become loose. Now, my experience is that the thing that, again, with well-made modern axes, even if they're made in the traditional sense of a wooden handle and a metal head, with no kind of paint on or fiberglass or any of that sort of plastic coverings, it's just a metal hand-forged head, wooden handle that we all like to use in bushcraft and traditional camping these days. And a lot of the manufacturers are Scandinavian. There's a number of them, Gransfors, Vetterlings, Hultafors, all those axes. It's fairly easy to see if the head's moving, and that's why I kind of talked about plastic coverings and paint and things. With those things, it's harder to see if things are moving. But if where the head has been for some time becomes open to the air, there will be a difference in colour in the wood, and you can see that the axe is starting to move. The axe head's starting to move. Now, in my experience, as I was about to say, the thing that causes axe heads to become loose typically is misuse of the axe, and people using an axe on other axes, on splitting wedges when the axe isn't tempered to be hitting onto metal, hitting heavy metal implements, hammering metal posts, metal stakes, big tent poles, tent pegs, the metal ones that you use for staking out marquees and big tents. Those type of things are what damage your axe. Hitting rock, possibly, I've not seen that, but I guess in theory that could happen. Hitting something that's too hard to hit with the axe. Now, the bit of the axe is tempered to be quite durable. The head as a whole is relatively soft, and if you hit other bits of metal with it, you'll get mushrooming on the top of the pole, on the back of the axe. It will start to fold over. It's relatively soft, and what can happen is the eye of the head, which is the bit that the helve or the handle goes through, can become distorted. And if the shape of that eye changes, then that can change the area of contact between the head and the handle, and the head can become loose. So for that reason, you do not want to be hitting your general purpose bushcraft axe, your Scandinavian forest axe, your small forest axe, or whatever it's called, onto other axes for splitting logs, splitting wedges, that type of thing, you need to use a specialist. You either need to use a hammer, a lump hammer for that type of thing, or you want to be using a specialist splitting maul that has a hammer head on the back of it, on the pole, where it's tempered correctly so it doesn't damage the axe that you're using. And some of the specialist splitting mauls have that, and that's what you should be using on metal, particularly where you're splitting. That's where most people damage their axe head if they're going to misuse. And I've seen plenty in cabins as I've been traveling around the world. You go into the woodshed, people have been smacking two axes together and they're in really bad shape. The head is loose. So as long as you don't do that, it's unlikely. Getting the thing wet is more likely to cause the wood to swell and therefore make it tighter. So that wouldn't cause it to come off. And if you do have a little bit of looseness, the old trick, it's not a long-term solution, but the old trick was to put the axe in some water so that the wood would swell and that would hold the head on a little bit better. And that can be a short-term remedy, but it's not one that I'd recommend. Now, if you look at the end of an axe, and this is the end of the question here, end of the answer to the question, if you look at the end of the axe, as I said, you've got the eye where the handle comes through the head, and then you've got the handle or the helve, whichever word you want to use, and there's normally a split in that, and in that split is driven a wedge. And if the worst comes to the worst, if there's nothing wrong with the handle, but the head is loose, if it's so loose that it's going to come off, then take it off, push out the wedge sideways, the old wedge. It's harder with some of them because they've got that metal staple in the modern axes, but that should help keep the thing on in the first place. Because what can make the axe a bit loose is if it's just got a wedge. If the wedge starts moving, the wedge comes out a bit, then that splaying of the handle comes in a bit, and then the head can start moving. So the harder it is to get the wedge to move, the less likely you're going to need to do this anyway. But if you can get the wedge out or get the head off and then get the wedge out, make another wedge and knock it back in. That would be another remedy. That's easier said than done, that process that I've just talked about, which is why rehandling axes sometimes requires you to saw the helve below the head. Some people even burn them off, but there are issues with tempering and things potentially there. But yeah, generally you're not going to need to do it. Old quick fix was to soak it in a bucket of water, but equally, if the issue is the wedge coming loose, there are things you can do about that. If you've got a knife, you can find some hardwood, you can make another wedge, you can knock it in, you can do that as long as the handle is fine. And as I say, with the modern hickory handles, you're highly unlikely to break the handle. That's just a realist's view of what are you likely to have to be able to do while you're out and about. And that brings us to the end of episode 61, and it is chilling off here. The sun is starting to go a bit, it is chilling off, and I'm going to get a move on. I can feel my feet starting to get a little bit cold, which is always a sign not just that your feet are cold, but the whole body is cooling down. Your body is not sending as much warm blood to your extremities. Your muscles are not pumping blood around through the feet, and everything's starting to close down. Your body's keeping the blood close to the core, and that's a sign that it's not just my feet that need warming up, it's me as a whole that needs warming up, and I will do that by carrying on with my hike. So thanks for listening. Do check out the tree plant ID link if you are interested in my tree and plant identification masterclass, which will be open into the new year for a little while, and then we go through the course of the year. It closes and it doesn't open again until the end of the year, the beginning of the year. We have a new enrolment of people coming in, and then we all go through the year together, that cohort of people. So if you're interested in me sending information, no obligation of course, but I will send you full information, background information on why the course is structured the way it is, how the course is structured, what my approach is. I'll send you all of those things if you go to paulkirtley.co.uk/tree plant ID. And links will be in the show notes. Links there on YouTube. And if you're listening, continue with what you're doing, your drive, your hike, your gym session, whatever you're doing, enjoy that. And if you're watching, enjoy. See you on the next video. Don't get stuck on YouTube for too long if you're on YouTube. There are more things to do than watch YouTube all day. But anyway, I will get on. I'm rambling. I'll have another hot cup of coffee and get on my way with the rest of my walk. Take care. Thanks for listening. And I will hope to see you on another Ask Paul Kirtley before too long. It's been too long since the last one. Part of what I've been working on are some online projects. And also working on putting together some trips for next year, blood vein trip coming up again next year, and various other things that are new programs at Frontier Bushcraft. Of course, I'm not here to sell things, I'm just here to make things available to people. You know about Frontier Bushcraft. If you're interested in any of the courses, any of the trips, you can go to frontierbushcraft.com and find them there. If you've got any questions, drop me an email or tweet. Tweet's quite good for questions if you want an immediate answer as opposed to an Ask Paul Kirtley. Anyway, that's it. Yeah, a few calls to action there at the end and a few offerings, and I will see you again soon. Lots going on. Take care. Cheers.